What is up, guys and girls? Today I'm going to be doing a book review. And the book I'm reviewing today is called People Are Idiots and I Can Prove It. The 10 Ways You're Sabotaging Yourself and How You Can Overcome Them. So this is a book by Larry Winget. He is labeled as a self-help slash motivational speaker. And here's the thing. This is a book that I've very much enjoyed actually, and it is one of the most recent books that I've come across, that I've gone through, and that's why I'm doing a review on it. So here's the general idea behind the book. First off, it's a very straightforward but rude book, and what that means is that it is literally going to either offend you and make you change, or offend you and just make you pissed off and you won't change. And you can tell it by how he titles the book, you can tell it by how he speaks, and he literally explains this in the introduction. He's literally like, I chose this title, and I am going to be very upfront. That's just the type of guy I am. And Larry Winget, first off, he's more than a self-help person. This book, and from what I garnered from this book and what he describes of himself, he doesn't just talk about self-help. He's actually very into every area of self-improvement, specifically financial advice. So he had a prior book which was very famous called You're Broke Because You Chose to Be. And that one's really well known, and something I hope I will remember to pick up sometime in the future. But you can tell just by the title of a book what it's going to be about. And that's the type of guy he is. He's literally a guy who's like, look, you are fat because you eat too much, you don't exercise enough, stop whining. And he'll say stuff like, you're broke because you waste all your money on stuff you don't need, you're not planning for your future, stuff like that. This book I read, I didn't read it, I listened to it via audiobook. However, I ran through it, the whole thing, twice, because when you're listening to audiobooks, you may end up missing certain aspects. It's not like a book where you can reread a paragraph multiple times. And so I actually went through the whole thing twice, and many areas I ended up rewinding just like 30 seconds back and listening to like 4 or 5 times, because either the audio was unclear, or he was talking too fast, or I just couldn't get it down, or I just got really bored and zoned out, and then I missed it. And so I'm not going to spoil the whole book for you guys if you guys want to pick it up. But I definitely thought it's a very generic book, not in the sense of how he speaks, because he's very, very straightforward, and that's what makes him effective. But in terms of topics, he bounces onto all topics. It's literally not like one thing. One could argue that a lot of it's focused on financial advice, but it really hits on every single topic, to how you raise your children. He stresses that a lot, and spending time with his children. One of the big things he mentions in the book actually is how he thinks people are complete idiots, and that's why they screw themselves over. And he illustrates this in various different topics. One of the topics is spending time with your family. He talks about how these people are obese and fat, and they sit on their couches all day and watch TV and reality shows for hours, and then they don't end up spending quality time with their children, which is completely ludicrous and ironic and stupid, because they are literally shooting themselves in the foot by not exercising, by not doing anything, by sitting on the couch and choosing to waste their hours every day watching TV rather than spending time with their children, and then later on they end up regretting it or complaining about it when they were the causes. And he says this is the average American, and most of them are idiots, and that's why they are obese or fat, or they don't have their financial life together. And you can tell how the tone of the book is. I really very much applaud him for how he wrote this book. Releasing a book is something that's arguably not as intensive as YouTube videos, because you put yourself out there more in YouTube videos, but at the same time I really do have to give him credit for releasing this book and being so one-sided. He is literally not scared to offend the reader because he wants his point out there. And I'm not gonna lie, sometimes when he's arguing and reasoning out his perspective, it's a very narrow, one-sided perspective based on his experiences. But again, in his introduction, he literally says as a disclaimer, this is my way of doing things and this is how I got to where I am. And it kind of implies that, okay, there's different pathways to success. My way may not necessarily be the best, but this is how I got there. And despite that, I still feel at some times there were some very, it's hard to describe, but I would say narrow-minded perspectives, simply because his way of describing things is too simplistic at times. It's not as simple as oh, you deserve it, you're fat because you didn't work out enough. And again, that's probably not the best analogy. Fat people, again, it's not the best analogy, but I don't want to spoil the book, so I can't elaborate too much. But the general idea behind the book I really find is really good. As far as things like exercise, I think I very much applaud him for how he goes about it. A lot of books are wishy-washy, and he explains in his book why those books don't sell. And he's literally like, I have to have this polar personality to jump off the shelf. I have to have this polar title in my book to jump off the shelf and sell. Otherwise, all the generic books will just sit on the shelf and no one will get them. And he says he admits it's a marketing tactic, but at the same time, I very much applaud him, because there truly aren't many self improvement or health and fitness books out there that are as caustic or straightforward as him. And I'm not gonna lie, if you're looking to get a lot of motivation for fitness and health in this book, it's not gonna be too much. He just touches on a topic. Again, it's mostly financial advice, but I very much admire his tone throughout, and at least regarding fitness, I think it illustrates his point the most, because he's like most fitness books are trying not to offend the reader. Why? Because most humans by nature don't try and offend people. This guy, he jumps out and he's different. He's like, look, you are fat because you eat too much, you eat the wrong things, and you do not exercise consistently. You don't put in the time. And he says, oh, every excuse you make is a stupid excuse you shouldn't make, blah, 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 blah. And you get the idea behind it, and I very much admire him for it, because it will knock some sense in people. Some people need that cold, hard truth. And one thing he also puts as a disclaimer in his introduction is that this book may not work for everyone. Some people need that cold, hard truth knocked into them in a very upfront, offensive way. Because if no one's going to tell them, then they're never going to change. They need that sort of advice, even if it hurts their feelings, to get to the next level. And for other people, that's not the case. They like working on it, and for whatever reason, they don't like getting offended. I think generally, though, most people, at least strong people, shouldn't mind being offended. In fact, most fat people, I feel like they have strong sense of identities, but not all of them. Some of them will be offended by this book. They don't want their feelings hurt, and they'll put it down without really taking any of the advice. But others, as illustrated in one of the examples he gives in the book, he literally gives an example from one of the letters written to him, where he describes this one girl who literally read his book and realized that, holy crap, you are right. I am fat because I chose to be. I don't have my life in order. I don't have my career in order because I'm not hustling. And you're right, it's all my fault. And I've stopped whining, and I completely changed my life because of it. And again, it's a very polar book, but I very much applaud him for it, because not a lot of people do this, and more people need to do it to impact and improve more lives out there. And again, I applaud him for it, because by doing stuff like this, you will get the backlash and the negative sides of it. He says he gets lots of hate mail, I believe, as well. And that's one of the drawbacks to being such a polar personality. And that's why a lot of people are scared to do it. But I very much applaud him for it. As far as the general book, though, I feel like it really just touched on a lot of topics. And even after going through it twice with my audiobook, and then repeating many sections multiple times, it's been like a week, 2 weeks, and most of the book I've sort of forgotten. Like the general tone, the strategies, the ideas I understood and I got, and the general feel of it I understood, the whole attitude behind it. But the general topics, like the actual 10 ways you're sabotaging yourself, I gotta be honest, I've forgotten. And at the same time, this book touched on a variety of different topics in improving yourself, mainly financial, but many topics like spending time with your family and so forth. And so it was very much a sort of book that touches on many different topics rather than a certain thing. And because a lot of these areas I kind of already understand this, and his book was really more just reinforcement of what I was already doing. Nothing really stuck out for me personally. But at the same time, even as I am reviewing this book, there's certain things that are just popping up again as I'm thinking about it. One of the stories he gives in the books was literally advice on being on top of your game in business, whatever job you have. And he stresses the point of being on time and delivering what you want or what you're requested when you promised it will be delivered. And he illustrates this by how he went to this one painter or landscape architect of some sort, and he was just very wishy-washy with the guy. He said he'd come on a certain day, he forgot to arrive at that day. Then Larry Winget went to a different one, and that guy was on top of it. He was on time. He said he would be there when he promised he would be there, even when Larry Winget doubted it himself. And then from there, that sort of promptness, that sort of delivery, and of a promising and designing exactly what he wanted, eventually led to Larry contracting this guy and doing dozens of other projects with this guy. So you can see how these sort of things can impact you. And again, it's somewhat generic advice. The whole idea of doing what you said when you promised it and going above and beyond what you promised it. It is a lot of stuff that's been said before in different ways, at least for me, because I've already absorbed a lot of information on this topic, and you can literally only say so much. But still, it's a brand new attitude, and it's a brand new way of looking at things for me. And no matter what I read, oftentimes, sometimes, occasionally, there's always a few golden nuggets of advice that I haven't heard before. So I very much like this book, and if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of this information already, it can really just knock your teeth in and force you to change. Just as a disclaimer, I'm just reviewing this book. I'm not sponsored or anything. Why would I be? I get like 20 views per video. And that's all I really want to say about this book. I thought it was decent. I want to check out his first book, You're Broke Because You Want to Be, because apparently it's the knockout bestseller, and this was the one that came after. I thought it was decent, and again, he always stresses one of the big things is something I've already been taught, being polarizing. He mentions how he chooses to wear his whole cowboy getup of cowboy attire when he goes to these lectures or speeches or interviews, and everyone of similar caliber, motivational speakers or financial help authors who show up as well, are wearing these business suits. And he says he does it because he wants to stand out. He wants to be the true him he is, and what ends up happening is it ends up benefiting him because he stands out. He's one of a kind. He gets requests to wear that sort of get-up now. It's true to his roots. It makes him original, interesting, and down to earth, and someone you can relate to. And again, being polarizing means that sort of thing. You will get haters, but you will also get people who love you for that fact. Whereas fitting into the crowd gets you a lot of generic responses. People who either, who most of the time are just lukewarm about you. So that's generally what I want to say about this book. I thought it was a pretty decent book, in all honesty. Again, after reviewing this, I'm going to see if I can Google and figure out the 10 ways, because literally, honestly, I've forgotten them already. But again, for me, I feel like it was somewhat generic, what the 10 ways were. At least for me, at least. Not saying there aren't some nuggets of advice that are decent. And just to pull out one last thing from the book without spoiling the whole book, and just to give you a little bit more flavor and rub about what this book is about, he talks about his children and how his children are like police. One's a police officer, one is like something else, like a musician or something, or a construction worker, I can't remember. And he's this guy who's gotten fairly rich off his financial help speeches as a motivational speaker and an author. So I was surprised to see how he raised his kids, and he let them be who they were. And he describes how you have to be on top of your game, and he describes his son, who's a police officer. So initially I'm just like, okay, but then he describes how his son goes above and beyond in his field, and it really just brings me back to a speech made by, I think, a pastor at Michael Jackson's funeral. And there's this one sentence, this one story he gives in the speech where he's literally like, if it just happens to fall upon you that God has given you the job of a floor sweeper, and that is the occupation you were destined to, then you better be the best floor sweeper that ever walked this earth. And then he says something like, Michael Jackson happened to have been ordained as a singer. He fulfilled that progression of being the best singer that you could possibly be in the world. And so that whole speech, again, check out the Michael Jackson funeral speech, because the pastor says it a lot better than I do. But the general idea is that, like, if it just so happens that you end up with whatever job, you better kick ass at that job and be the best that you can. And even if it means that you're like the floor sweeper or the janitor, you better be the best damn janitor in the world. And so, he describes this with his child, who's a police officer. His child does all this kickboxing and Muay Thai, and he's an instructor and a black belt, and he hustles, and he goes the extra 10 miles and is fit and exercises and does all this stuff to train and go above and beyond what he has to in order to be the best at his job. So that's one of the, like, that's just a little bit more of the flavor of what the book's like. That's all I really want to say. As always, if you like this video, leave a like and comment below on your opinions or your thoughts or your requests. And as always, favorite, share this video with someone you think will like it, be impacted by it, be influenced by it. Maybe someone you want to read this book or you think might like reading this book. And as always, subscribe. Hit the subscribe button down below. It's free. And it will alert you whenever I make new videos on YouTube. Thanks for watching. See you guys later.